This calving event is as if the entire lower tip of Manhattan broke off, except that the thickness, the height of it, is equivalent to the height of buildings that are 2 to 3 times higher than they are. Just take a few seconds to picture that.
Scientists learned long ago that the Earth's climate has powerfully shaped the history of the human species, biologically, culturally, and geographically. But only in the last few decades has research revealed that humans can be a powerful influence on the climate as well. A growing amount of scientific evidence indicates that since 1950, the world's climate has been warming, primarily as a result of emissions from the burning of fossil fuels and the raising of tropical forests.
Global warming has become perhaps the most complicated issue facing world leaders. Global emissions of carbon dioxide were at a record high in 2011 and were likely to take a similar jump in 2012, scientists reported in early December 2012, the latest indication that efforts to limit such emissions are failing. Overall, global emissions jumped 3% in 2011 and are expected to jump another 2.6% in 2012, researchers reported.
The rise in sea levels is linked to three primary factors, all caused by this ongoing global climate change. Firstly, thermal expansion. When water heats up, it expands. About half of the past century's rise in sea level occurred due to warmer oceans simply occupying more space.
Secondly, there's melting of glaciers and polar ice caps. Large ice formations like glaciers and the polar ice caps naturally melt back a bit each summer. But in the winter, snows, made primarily from evaporated seawater, are generally sufficient to balance out the melting. Recently, though, higher temperatures caused by global warming have led to greater than average summer melting as well as diminished snowfall due to later winters and earlier springs. This imbalance has negative effects on our planet.
Lastly, ice loss from Greenland and West Antarctica. As with glaciers and the ice caps, increased heat is causing the massive ice sheets that cover Greenland and Antarctica to melt at an accelerated pace. Scientists also believe meltwater from above and seawater from below is seeping beneath Greenland's and Antarctica's ice sheets, effectively lubricating ice streams and causing them to move more quickly into the sea. Moreover, higher sea temperatures are causing the massive ice shelves that extend out from Antarctica to melt from below, weaken, and break off.
Good evening and welcome to CBC News. The Russian meteor explosion over the city of Chelyabinsk on Friday, February 15th, injured more than 1,000 people, but more of that later. Also, another huge question that seems to run around today's society is, are Tampax tampons really reliable? Now for the breaking news. Scientists have reported many environmental issues linked to global warming. In West Antarctica, onlookers in a catamaran witnessed the huge iceberg flip over with a huge roar. This was caused because of the melting of the right side of it. We are all aware of the melting of these glaciers, but for one to completely do an 180-degree flip is just astonishing and utterly terrifying. Now, for the weather report, back to you, Wendy.
Hello, and welcome to Weather with Wendy, or as I like to call it, Wendy's Weather. Tomorrow will be cloudy, with a chance of rising sea levels at an extremely fast rate of 3.4 millimeters per year. As small as this seems, it is in fact very considerate. If we do not change our habits, this will be the fate of Florida. San Francisco, devastating destruction will be our destiny. Also, there's major flooding going on in Venice, New Orleans, and many other coastal regions. This, once again, has been caused by the rising of sea levels. So anyways, I'll report back tomorrow, but we might be broadcasting under the sea, in the octopus's garden. Thanks again. I'm here in Newfoundland, and holy Moses, is there a polar bear here or what? At Hartward High School, students witnessed a polar bear wandering through the streets of Campbell's Cove. Animal Patrol is preparing to tranquilize this poor animal with no home to go to. Environmentalists have gathered an explanation of what happened to this wild animal. Due to the water expansion and overheating of the planet, the ice caps have melted and several species, like the polar bears, have lost their families and homes. This terrified animal is searching for a comforting home. What do you have to say, Angus?
Welcome to Animals with Angus, or as I like to call it, Angus's Animals. Well, it's certainly sad to see that this animal might be killed due to its frightening presence on humanity. This just goes to show what measures we need to take in order to protect our environment and everything that surrounds it. This is only the beginning, and if we don't move quickly, the world will not be as a safe place anymore. Thank you for watching NF News, and we'll keep you posted.
Oh, hello there, and thank you for tuning in to the Boardroom with Balukas, or as I like to call it, Balukas' Boardroom. As an example of how costly it can come to be as a consequence of rising sea levels, the cost of protecting Metro Vancouver from rising sea levels has been estimated at $9.5 billion. There are concerns that the $9.5 billion estimate might be too low. There are some very serious world-recognized climate scientists who are now talking about seeing 2 or 3 or even 4 meters in the future. If those scientists are right, then the cost of dealing with rising sea levels will obviously cost a lot more, potentially $50 to $100 billion more. As another example, the cost of housing thousands of Manitoba First Nation members who were forced from their homes during last spring's flood disaster has hit $40 million, according to the federal government. A total of 2,255 people from about half a dozen First Nations have been unable to return home since the floods, which began in late March 2011, damaged their communities, and forced them to flee. The price tag includes the cost of covering the evacuees' meals and per diem allowances. CBC News has determined that $40 million could have built about 250 houses on First Nations, based on an average on-reserve home price of $160,000. When sea levels rise rapidly, as they have been doing, even a small increase can have devastating effects on coastal habitats. As seawater reaches farther inland, it can cause destructive erosion, flooding of wetlands, contamination of agricultural soils, and lost habitat for fish, birds, plants, and even wild land-living animals like polar bears. Many animal species will lose their homes and might even end up dying due to a lack of food. Not only are we putting ourselves at risk, but all living organisms that surround us.
When large storms hit land, higher sea levels mean bigger, more powerful storm surges that can strip away everything in their path, which can be detrimental to our environment. Sea level rise can increase the damage caused by storms because the mean water level is higher, waves can attack higher on the shore profile, and coastal erosion often is accelerated, bringing structures nearer the shoreline and potentially removing protection offered by dunes and other protective features. In addition, on the social level, hundreds of millions of people live in these areas that will become increasingly vulnerable to flooding. A large portion of the human population now lives in coastal areas, and the rate of population growth in these areas is higher than average. Many large cities are located near the coast, for example Tokyo, Bombay, and New York. Higher sea levels would force them to abandon their homes and relocate. Low-lying islands could be submerged completely. That may not sound like a lot, but consider the volume of ice now locked up in the planet's 3 greatest ice sheets. If the West Antarctic ice sheet were to disappear, sea level would rise almost 19 feet. The ice in the Greenland ice sheet could add 24 feet to that, and the East Antarctic ice sheet could add yet another 170 feet to the level of the world's oceans, more than 213 feet in all. Antarctica's ice sheet is said to be 2 miles thick. Imagine what effects that would have on our planet if all that were to melt. The severity of this situation shows that the 100-foot-tall Statue of Liberty could be completely submerged within a matter of decades. People in Vietnam are very much affected by the rising in sea levels. In these coastal regions, the population lives about a meter above sea level. They used to live where those poles are a few years ago. Every year, the water rose little by little. There's been 40 to 50 meters of erosion in the past 4 years because of this rise. They have lost lots of coastal lands. By 2040, 81% of the province will be flooded because it will rise 25 centimeters. Vietnam has a population close to 90 million, and this region is a very populated section of Vietnam. Therefore, it is clear that there will be tons of people that are forced to leave their homes and start entirely new lives. In addition, on the economic aspect, the sea level rise has caused saltwater to taint farmland. This farmer used to harvest rice twice a year, but because of the abundance of saltwater on his field, he can now only harvest once a year. This affects their local economy, which is already struggling to prosper. The government still wants economic growth, but is now forced to deal with the rising of sea level. On the economic level, there are many things that must be considered when discussing costs due to the effects of rising sea levels on our topography. There are migration costs in order to move people to a safer environment. There are the expenses for cleaning up destroyed sites, and finally, there are the costs to take action in rebuilding and fixing damaged places. There are two broad categories for dealing with rising coastal waters. 1. Structural, and 2. Non-structural. The first option includes building or repairing dikes, sea gates, and other protective barriers. Non-structural options are broken down into 3 subcategories: accommodate, retreat, avoid. Accommodation in this context means accepting occasional flooding and taking steps to protect infrastructures like utilities, roads, and buildings. Retreat means moving back from flood-prone areas over time, eventually removing development and returning the land to its natural state. Avoid means preventing development in flood-prone areas in the first place. Port facilities are another type of infrastructure that will be affected by climate change and sea level rise. Higher sea level will probably decrease the effectiveness of breakwaters against the force of waves. When such effects are anticipated, countermeasures can be implemented to maintain function and stability. The total expenditure to keep present level of functions and stability for about 1,000 ports is estimated to be $110 billion for a 1 meter sea level rise.